Greetings, this is Craig Pepin, Project Lead for the Davis Grant. Thank you for listening to this audio recording from the Spring 2024 Competency Fellows Workshop Series. These workshops are funded by a grant from the Davis Educational Foundation, and together with other materials funded by the grant and available on the Competencies website, are designed to help enhance your understanding and learning of Champlain's college competencies. Today's workshop, titled Creative Odyssey, Charting New Horizons in Higher Education, is led by Barbara Columbo, our Creativity Fellow.
Thank you so much for being here today and taking the time. I know we were discussing that before. This is not the ideal time of the semester, so I appreciate very much you taking the time to come here. If you don't know me, I'm one of the psychology professor here, and I've been researching creativity, especially creativity linked to education for many, many years. And in my previous institution, we had a group that focused on enhancing creativity in a different level of education. So we spent many, many years trying to find the best way of integrating creativity, starting from grade school up to higher ed. And so that's why I think I'm here to try to share something of this. I think creativity is fascinating because it's complicated, but also that in that complication, there is a lot of simplicity that allows to put creativity and integrate creativity in many, many different ways. One of the problems that psychologists have faced, psychology love to argue and fight over everything. They found it very entertaining for some reason. And creativity is one of the things that I've been fighting over a lot. So let's start from one of the main things that people have been fighting around, because that's the basis of that will allow us to understand how we can add creativity in our classroom. So what is creativity? How would you define creativity? Or if it's easier, if you can give me an example of something creative or a person who is very creative, or a definition of creativity, whatever it's easier for you.
I think I give one definition. I'm preempting Bob here. I give one definition as sort of seeing connections between things that other people don't.
Okay.
Right. See, being able to combine already existing things in new ways that I hadn't thought of before.
Great.
Yeah, creating something, whether it be an object or ideas or concepts, from non-obvious or non-specified sort of prompts or evidence or material. In other words, something that's not like formulated for you.
Okay, something new. I haven't created something new.
Or at least a different arrangement.
Okay, a different arrangement, so getting there. Rebecca and Tracy, anything you would like to add?
No, that pretty much covers it for me.
Okay,
something unexpected.
Something unexpected. So great, and this is part of the aspects that have been suggested as well. And one definition of creativity is connecting different elements in different ways. There are two others that actually add something and can help giving more ideas on how you can integrate it. But the first thing that I would like to go back to is something that Bob said about the product. Are we sure that to be creative, we need a product at the end of the process? Where is creativity? Is the product that is creative, or is the process?
That's a great question. I don't know if there's an answer for it. I think maybe contextual in some cases.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people are arguing. And it's interesting that even children can understand that difference, because if you show a little movie of someone starting something very creative for nothing, organizing things and preparing an amazing creative drawing, for example, for 5 or 6 years old. And then that person goes away, another person comes and finishes the drawing. And then you ask the child, who is the creative person, the one that completed and turned in the final drawings, or the person who did the process up to the last 5 minutes? And most children say it's the first person. So not the person who actually finalized it, which is interesting. And it gives food for thought because oh, welcome, Carol. Here's someone else. Yay. It gives food for thought, especially for group work. So where is creativity? If there's one person that leads the way, and I'm going to try to focus on creativity, should I focus on that person, or is it okay for different people in different roles contribute to the creation of the final products? And so 6, 7 years old think that it's just the person has the idea and the other one forget about it. Older individuals like us tend to think that it could be a process that comes from with different roles, with someone being the leader in the start and others adding details. Thoughts about this?
I mean, I work with the game studio. You know, a lot of the development work, there's a real, we push them to iterate on different ideas and be creative. But we also are talking about it in a very much more focused sense in terms of creative solutions to specific problems, right? Not just going by the book, but thinking on the cliche of outside the box, but in a very constrained way. So there's types of creativity, which is the big picture creativity. We're going to do this wonderful thing. And there's a creativity of how do we use the tools we have to accomplish this when we're going by the book, we really might not be able to do that, right? So I don't think there's one better than the other, but there's a different sort of thing, big picture and little picture.
Yeah. Great. And that's exactly the direction I want to go. Something, yeah.
Yeah, I blame the Italians.
Why not?
Well, always,
this,
right?
For this notion that there's the single great creative genius.
Yeah.
Going back to the Renaissance and Vasari, Lives of the Artists,
But
that
actually,
glorifying the great
yeah,
artists
but
of the Renaissance.
yeah, but sorry, and all those other people, they had a studio like the game studio, and actually there were so many people. Then just because they didn't have social media, they decided to have one person that was a speaker, but it was recognized that it was
also those great artists. What do we know them for? Their craftsmanship.
Yeah.
It's what lives is the manifestation of the creative idea in the artwork that we physically have. Without the execution, without the creative execution, the creative idea would have been lost.
Yes.
So I don't know what the value is there, but I mean, there's a lot of these aspects to it that are complex.
Yeah. And that's why I say creativity is complicated and fascinating. But so going back to what we were saying, there's some interesting thing. The first thing is that research base has been proved that when you have constraints, you tend to be more creative. So that works very well. One of the worst things to do to have people being creative is say, okay, you have no boundaries, go.
I think we've all learned that in the classroom over the years.
Yes, but you will be surprised at how many people still believe that's the way. Be totally free. Actually giving constraints, giving random words and ask to create a poem, for example, is a good way to get something that is really different, or having some rules that you have to follow. As a starting point, that's a good way to start. And then the other thing is that and I'm going back to my first question about the definition of creativity. So the idea of connecting existing elements in different ways is one of the main things. But then there's the other two definitions that kind of integrate those ones. And one is actually linked to something that Bob said. So there is an idea of creativity as a way of producing many ideas that come from many different perspectives. And that's starting from a set rules or a set framework, and being able to, within that framework, give different ideas, changing perspectives. And considering changing the way you see at the problem, and that may lead to a different solution sometimes. And that's the idea of behind the brainstorming part. So you give all the ideas, your ideas you want, and then you bring back those ideas to the framework or the rules that you have, and then you try to see which one can work and which one cannot. And many times you realize that even if you want to go by the book or by the rules, there are some rules that you consider not changeable, while in reality they are, and you self-impose the rules to you. So for example, in marketing, there was this anecdote that was pretty interesting, when there were people trying to get a new tennis racket that will work better, and they were trying to make it look cooler or lighter or maybe heavier to be more powerful. And then someone decided, well, why don't we build a bigger racket, so that beginners have more chances to hit the ball. And then so people says like, well, you can't, because the rackets are always the same size. And then they realized there was no rules about it. And so this company, big, what is called, the big racket and tennis racket, and they made a lot of money out of it. And because they had this idea that was going against the rule, there was a rule that was self-imposed. And for problem solving, that sometimes also is a good key. So many times, the way you present the elements of a problem influence the way people are going to find the solution, because they automatically organize the things according to the way you're presenting to them. So for example, if you give something in a box, the box is not going to be considered part of the object that you can use to find a solution. But if you give the box and the things inside the box, then automatically these are two elements that you can combine for finding the solution. So and that goes back, that disconnects it, the idea of having a lot of ideas, changing perspective, to idea of connecting things in a different ways. So we have this many ideas that we can call widening the perspectives and sending as many ideas as possible from many points of views, like in going around the room and trying to see things from different perspective, connecting different even ideas that could be far away. For example, joining ideas from two different majors at Champlain College or from different disciplines and trying to have them work together, that will lead to creativity, because expertise can be joined together. And then the third idea about creativity is reorganizing. So it's similar to connecting, but goes it's a slightly different approach, because basically you're not connecting, but you're taking the element and organizing that in a different way, changing them, moving them around. And that can also bring to different creative idea and different creative perspectives. So you're not inventing, in this case, anything new. You're just changing the way you're seeing things. This has been reported a lot in when you read self-report or diaries of scientific discoveries. Many times this has been reported in a way to get to the creative solutions. So this widening your perspective, connecting ideas, and restructuring the elements that you have, when you use all of them together, seems to be all the elements that bring creativity. So that's for the starting point. Then the challenge is what can we do in our classroom to have students using all these strategies? So widening, connecting, and reorganizing. Do you think there's anything you do either in teaching or in assignments that can foster any of those ways of thinking or acting? And this could mean creating something, solving the problems, organizing your own study routine.
I was waiting for them to say something. Yeah, I mean,
Lost my creativity now.
As a simple example, we have here Carlotta. She is a PhD student from Italy. Just visiting for a few weeks, just bringing someone from another country helps with the widening, because immediately you have a different perspective on things. And having interaction with students, that's not always possible. Was so lucky to have this opportunity to have her for 3 weeks, but even something small like that can help in a better way to widen the perspective.
I
Because
do group work a lot in class, and one of the reasons I do it is so that the structure of the assignment is such that no matter what the assignment is, I want the people in the group to bounce ideas off each other. So I give them some parameters, but not super strict. Like they have to organize who does what and how they do it. And it's led to some interesting approaches sometimes, mostly good. And of course, everything we do in like Capstone in the game studio is sort of a structured form of, at least ideally, creativity. The first stage usually of iteration is a lot of bouncing ideas off of folks. We have a team, depending on how large the teams are, 7, 8 people, 9 people, you get a bunch of different ideas. Like ideally, it doesn't always work.
Yep.
And then it settles down to the organization of things and the connections of things once you have some ideas. And that's where we struggle, I think, is that they're pretty creative in coming up with their basic ideas. Less so when coming up with solutions to the problems that then entail in trying to do what they're trying to do. Although we made some progress with that, and part of it's technical. There is a lot of creativity, for instance, in programming, and a lot of it is that what you talked about, the organization of the way, if nothing else, because mathematical operations change radically when you shift the orders of the operators.
Yes.
And in a lot of ways, you have what seem to be hard limits that you're working with, that you mentioned, and then sometimes once in a while we get folks who are creative and say, well, what if I just ignore that and do it this way? But why, if it's not like a law of mathematics or something, but that's more of a struggle because students are wanting to apply the best practices that they've learned, and that requires a certain degree of reiteration. But at the same time, we're asking them to think differently.
Yeah.
And so there's a tension there that for seniors is still tough to master, I think.
Yeah, and that's a common problem because many times for creativity you think, oh, I have new ideas, I have something innovative, but for a creative process to be successful, you have to go through that spiral. So you have to have a lot of ideas, then you have to go back and be very pragmatical and see, can this work?
Talk about creative solutions, and again, it's more sort of instrumental, admittedly. It's not as pure, perhaps, but even our artists are working in that same environment, at least in that context. It's because or it could be the same with graphic design, for instance. You have a client, you have a project, you want creative solutions, but you still have parameters. So can't go hog wild. And I agree, though, that the parameter that limits, to me, constraints are always the wellspring of the best creativity, and I try to do that.
Yeah, it helps give. And the other thing that I think is very helpful is something that you just mentioned, giving roles to students, so that that really helps because then they have a focus. And sometimes, if it's possible, and not always possible, it could be useful just to switch roles. And that's that might bring to interesting new solutions. And for example, that's a very psychology-based example. But let's say you're always the person whoever is depressed come and ask help for. So but that brings to a point when the person who is depressed never trying to do something because there's the same approach every time. Oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I'm going to Carlotta and she's going to give me great ideas. And then I'm not going to do anything. And in 10 days, I'm going to be back. So a way of switching the roles could be first Carlotta, for the friend going to Carlotta and say, oh, I'm so depressed. And she says like, today I'm really having a bad day too, and I want to help you, but can you tell me, do you have any idea how we can get out of this before I help you? That switches the perspective, switches the role, and the person gets out of that boundaries, and that helps. And then you can go back to the same role again. And maybe it's not the most productive things in that specific time frame because maybe you put a person in a role that there is not their strongest asset, but it might really help switching and changing perspective and reorganizing things, even if it's just temporarily. So that could be something to consider. And of course, always depends on what you're doing and what, but also many times for problem solving, that's useful because they may help seeing things, finding new connection or reorganizing the way in different formats
Yeah,
and in
that's
different
really
ways.
powerful. The challenge I find often is that because of the type of instruction we do here a lot of programs, people really are compelled sort of to stay in their lane. And
Yeah.
they're trying to master a very particular thing. And so when you ask them before they've really mastered that, because they're still learning, to step out of that lane, even if it's part in the macro sense of learning what they actually, their thing, there's a lot of inertia.
Yeah.
And most of it's lack of confidence because they're still struggling to master what they're told they need to master. Then you're asking them to step out and look at it from a different perspective, which they need to do, but it's a hard sell sometimes. So we're still working, I think, on making that work.
Yeah, and that brings to another. I have a list of 7 suggestions, and I'm going randomly here. That's the material I'm going to share. But one of the other thing is actually linked to the fact that if you lack confidence or you don't feel very safe in what you're doing, you may not feel empowered to be creative. And so what could be now, again, it depends on the assignment, depends on time constraints and everything, but in the classroom, a good way of doing that is creating very easy, not extremely affecting the grades assignments, where they're focused on helping students spread their wings and be creative. So low stake assignments that help them say, okay, it doesn't matter. It goes bad. You lose 0.5 point. There should be something. Otherwise, the thing is, it doesn't matter because I'm not getting anything out of it. But it's not such a big assignment that will ruin their project, ruin their grades. And then they will allow them to test themselves. And many times that will help building that self-confidence, especially because when you're too much of an expert in something, it's harder to connect things in a different way. It's harder to reorganize things because you're so fast and so good at doing things the same way. That's why on earth I should change it, even if I know from a rational standpoint that can bring to a better solution. So this could be a very easy idea that can be easily implemented and help with that self-confidence problem. The other thing that is interesting, and I probably does not apply very well to design programming, but for other parts of game design might apply, and for a lot of other topics might apply. So there is a way of thinking that's being proven to really foster creativity, and that is visual thinking. So organizing or suggesting tasks where students are used to visualize the elements and reorganize them. It could be in their mind, or it could be physically reorganizing them with symbolizing them and reorganizing them. That is something that really foster that creative reorganization, different connections, and also changing perspective. So actually that fits with all the 3 aspects that we were saying. And the type of visualizing could be very different depending on what you're teaching. If you're teaching a creative writing class, you may have people visualizing the trajectory of their novels or their blog posts or whatever they're doing. If I am teaching my students to run analysis with SPSS to answer a question regarding psychology, I may ask them to visualize the variables before actually starting to press the buttons on the statistical softwares. I ask them to do that. They don't always do that, but I try.
Yeah, that I find is one of the interesting challenges is like on a basic level, when the students are turning in work, like in Canvas, they tell me it's a digital platform. Why are you only using text? And it's a real hard sell because they're hard coded somehow. School assignment must be written text, and even when you're, just beating them up the head and shoulders about it, to try to get them to do that, to use imagery to visualize things. I find there's oftentimes some sort of stuff that they're resistant, but they're not. You have to sort of chip away at the sort of tendencies they have.
Yeah.
So some of my class, I started making them work with slide decks and minimize the words purely and force them to use visuals to take some of the load. And it's you would think that students who are in like graphic design or game art would be better, but they're not necessarily.
No, it's a different mindset, and I'm trying to do that. This semester I'm teaching a sophomore internship class, so they have a small internship, and they're also learning what it's like to be a psychology professional intern. So they have to plan the whole semester. They have to find solution to things that are out of the school control because it's an internship. So I'm having that use visual maps a lot, and their website. But I also have to say, you know what? You're not tech savvy. Fine, take a piece of paper, draw, design, do whatever. Take a picture and upload on Canvas. We're good. And these are some of these low stake assignment that I'm not really concerned. I just want them to try to do that, to visualize it, to visualize whatever is the roadblock, and visualize a way around that. And I found that the first time I asked the students to do that, they look at me like, really? Is there something I really have to do, or can I just go back on my phone? But then they start saying, hey, I didn't think about the fact there is a way around it. I was just looking in front of me, and now that you forced me to do it, I hated for you that for 20 minutes, and now I actually see a solution about that. So not all, and I'm not suggesting those things, expecting everything to work all the time for everyone. But I'm hoping to give several suggestions that can be adapted and used as needed. So the visualizing thing that can be integrated in different ways could be good, and can also be one of the roles within a group. So there is a person that maybe is more used to think visually, that why people are talking, make a visual diagram of what people are saying, and or the ideas and how they connect, and all the elements that everyone is saying. So that could also be something that can be used. The other thing is, and we touched upon that a little bit, try to get diverse perspectives into whatever big project you're doing. And that could be intended in many different ways. It could be by bringing someone from another country, depending on what you're doing. It could be bring someone from a different industry. It could be mixing people that have been working at different projects for a class so that they can comment on each other projects. It could be bringing, sometimes I ask colleagues to come into my class and listen to my students' project, even if they don't know anything, because they have a different expertise, and ask questions. So many times they ask questions, they're apparently irrelevant because they don't understand the basics, but they force the students to explain and find new perspective from that. So we do that a lot for our capstone. We have a lot of people coming in and listen to the students' first ideas and critique them, even if they're from different areas. And that is before students sit down with an idea. And many times after having this meeting with people from all around the college that listen to their ideas and say, well, what the heck would you do that? Why don't you do this other thing? Students revise and come up with much more creative ideas.
Yeah, I think what you hit upon there is really important, Barb, is the timing.
Yes.
Because, again, going back to the examples with the game folks, early in the process, the critique and the diverse perspectives are much more effective than late. Like we do industry reviews. Sometimes we have folks from the industry who they'll pitch their projects to feedback on. But we found out we had to do that much earlier than we thought, because way too late, there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah.
And then instead of being an encouraging sort of creative process, it's more of a discouraging and threatening process.
Yes.
And so I like what you're talking about. Before you start to set things in stone, you get the diverse perspective, you exercise your creativity in that realm, and then you're free to set the parameters for the creativity of the execution.
Exactly. There is just one, I totally agree. I just one exception to that. When you do something up to almost the end, you try and it doesn't work and you don't understand why.
Yes, true, absolutely.
Yeah. So in that
That
case,
does help.
in that case, you just go and talk with someone that doesn't understand what it's all about, and sometimes they can have an insight. Or the other thing that many that is being reported to be useful in this case is from creative problem solving is take space. So work, then give a space for students or whoever is working to focus on something different, so that their mind is not focusing on that constantly, because that prevents for changing perspectives. And so there were famous creative especially scientists that would say, well, I will go to sleep and then I will wake up with a great idea. That's not recommended in class. Let's all take a nap and come back to that. But
No, you're right. I mean, we try to get, like, that's actually a task that, like, game study that our budding young producers are supposed to be taking on. A lot of times they'll take their teams in the middle of the senior year, their middle of their deep work project, and they'll take a day in which they can go work and go out to have a dinner and drinks together or whatever,
amazing.
and bring it back in. And in nearly every case, it's a positive thing, and they come back rejuvenated, particularly if they've had a tough critique or something like that. In classes, if I have a long class, I mix up the type of things I'm doing, at least, so that students don't have. Well, I don't want to sit there for 3 hours doing the same thing either, but it's a little bit more problematic in class.
Yeah.
I agree with the principle.
Yeah, the principle is great, but for example, for my classes, what I usually meet twice a week, if we're working on a big project from the beginning to the end, I have service learning classes when we work in class and then they apply with the community. Maybe again towards the middle, we take a class and we work on something completely different.
Yeah.
And something that they have to focus, so they cannot just do, halfway and keep thinking. So I mean, it's not as fun as going out and having.
No, it's different context.
But it's a different context, and I still teaching something, so I'm not wasting time, but I still get to that point. I appreciate the fact that when you have the 3 hours, I have that for some classes that's much more complicated, and if you have a time constraint to get those.
But it also gives you more opportunities to take those breaks and switch gears and such, I think. So
Yeah.
I like the 3-hour classes.
Yeah.
I think I can get more creativity sometimes in those, depending on what I'm doing, than the other ones, but it varies.
Yeah, it also depends on the type of task and the type of creative thinking you're going for. For example, if it's something when you get in, you really go like the flow experience, then if you have a longer time, that works very well because you get your team into the flow experience, they lose track of time and they're extremely productive. And then they're also very happy, endorphins everywhere. So that's that's also a good way. It depends on the type of creative thinking that you want to get at that point. We have a lot of time. Then the other thing, and I think this is something that at Champlain is really easy to achieve, is that of course people tend to be more creative when there is intrinsic motivation. So sometimes intrinsic motivation is like a dream, but I found that compared to other places I work, students at Champlain are motivated. They love what they do here, and so they tend to be motivated to do what they're doing, especially if they understand why they're asked to do that. So back to my example, when I asked them to design this visual maps of what they were doing. Yes, they were a little skeptical, but I explained why they were doing it and why exactly that will help. And then I says, like, I promise you that this is going to help and you're going to see it within the next 30 minutes, and live up to that promise and increase their intrinsic motivation. And that actually brings them to be more creative, because they're more invested and they're willing to invest more in what they're doing. So that's another, I think everyone always, as a teacher, tries to foster intrinsic motivation. It's not always possible, but
along with motivation, I think that one of the key things I found, at least over the years, is not shutting down creative ideas, even when they're not necessarily the most successful or the most relevant. I pride myself in being able to connect anything to anything pretty much in the class. So I tell the students, go ahead, you don't care how wonky it is, if it's your approach to the problem we're talking about, let's hear it. Because the worst thing is I find if they feel that they're too scared to be creative because it's not going to be the right thing, or it's going to get, shot down or mocked or whatever. So that means you have to be more willing to accept all sorts of strange stuff sometimes. And you might think at first, man, I don't know how this connects, but I think over time it ends up being better.
Yeah.
You get some really interesting things, because what I think might be weird on second thought might just be a really different approach to the problem. Because I think subconsciously as professors, we oftentimes, I know I do, impose our own sense of what we expect on things. And then when it doesn't meet that, we sort of go, that's not good. We're trying to fight against that. To accept the difference that's going to come up is a challenge, I think.
Yeah, and that's an extremely good point. And I always try to, whenever we do an activity, when new ideas or new solutions are suggested, I always make it clear that everything should be welcome. The only thing we not accept is something that is disrespectful and hateful. Yeah, and also there should be support for every idea. And I try to do exactly the same thing. And you never know, as you said, something that right now seems completely unrelated or maybe not even that useful. Maybe that's an idea that later on we can go back.
Some other student might
or
find
some
that
other
useful and
students
build on it that I didn't see it.
Yeah,
I tell them there's 20
yeah.
of you and one of me. You're hell of a lot smarter than I am. You're going to figure these things out.
Yeah, and the other thing that is true, going back to something that I touched upon briefly, is that experts tend to have more constraints to creativity because what we know, we tend to know that many things that we have our own limits. So sometimes actually I learn new ideas and new solutions from students because they have a fresh perspective. And so that's also extremely useful. So the opening and widening the perspective counts for the students and for us as well. So that's, I think, a good thing to consider. And the other thing, I think also this is another thing that goes without saying, that is also linked to something that came up before. Creativity, it does not exist on its own. And going back to what you were saying about the Renaissance artist, there has to be knowledge if you want to be creative within an academic setting or in a problem solving or in a professional settings. If you may give a hint of an idea, but you will never be a creative problem solver or get to a good outcome if you don't have the basic knowledge. So if I come to one of your classes and listen to a project and want to be part of a group, I may have an idea that no one thought about because I know nothing about game design. But then if I have to do something myself, I will be completely lost because I lack the knowledge.
I use the example of music, where your great jazz people will go on these riffs and go stuff, but they also know the fundamentals before they started doing that. Before you go outside of the box, you have to know what the box is. I mean, and that's a challenge sometimes when people, especially with good students, are really creative, they're learning stuff going. You have to slow them down sometimes. Even our core class was the same way too, with theory and stuff, to make sure that they have the grounding, then turn them loose, because it's easy to get carried away, which is a good thing. But
yeah, and sometimes there is a good time for being carried away, and then there is a good time to go back to the beginning. But yes, you're right. Like artists that were so innovative, like Kandinsky or Picasso, they could still draw in a very traditional way. And same for music. My husband is a composer, and he does very modern things. But then he knows everything about Beethoven and can write, if you want to, exactly like Beethoven. So yes,
Can I ask something about that?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking here to the way that Champlain has defined creative thinking through the rubric and the work that the working group did on it back in the day. And one of the aspects of that is contextualization.
Yes.
Right. And so one of the things that we ask students to do is through the rubric to connect a creative work of some kind to previous traditions like Beethoven, in the case of musical composing, personal experiences. I guess it's another thing people often sort of connect to. So I guess the question I would have is, on the one hand, it's important, as Bob said, to know what the rules are, right? So have some knowledge of the form. But how do you avoid those becoming constraints?
Is that I go back to what I say about wadding, about the example of the big tennis racket. So I think there's something that you know the rules, and then you start from then and you say, okay, what can I challenge of the rules without falling apart? So in music, what I can challenge about harmony or progressions to make some and to get to the point where something does not make sense anymore, or is not something that people would define as music, but say, who was that person making all that noise? So to what extent can I get to and how much can I challenge? And that's where I think part of the rubric also says, well, let's talk with experts and let's talk with non-experts, right? That's also one thing that can be really helpful to go back and forth. You start from the rules, you try to get away from them, and then you go back and say, hey, am I too far away? There is a composer that have wrote something for a colander, one for the pasta, when you put water on it, and that's part of the music composition. Is that going too far or not? Apparently not, since it's performed. But depending on the expert, the person might have asked, or someone might have said,
essentially a performance, right? So you encourage all the ideas, and then one of the best ways to, I think, do what Craig we're talking about is to let the students then implement the things and see what happens sometimes. Because oftentimes, if you don't have the fundamental knowledge that you need to really be creative, you run into problems trying to execute what your idea was. And therefore, there's something wrong with the idea. It's just that you aren't necessarily ready to implement it. So then you have to, not so much a constraint as it is a sort of requirement to go back and figure out what you need to do to implement the creative thing you came up with, which will entail you mastering certain basic ideas. And so I think it sort of organically fixes that way. If you have the time and space to do it that way, it's like sort of that context is, okay, run with this idea and then see what happens. You know, it's you can just throw this stuff up on the wall or whatever, and you don't have to learn anything about painting or whatever. How do you reproduce it? How do you connect this to the ideas that you have, that the emotions that generated it? Do you know how to express this? Well, if not, then we go back, you can go back and work on that.
Yeah, and
but you don't discourage the thing.
Yeah, and I go back to visualization can also be useful here, because instead of trying it all out and maybe having a lot of resources, you just visualize. Okay. Like there was, I think the person who invented engine for the first trains reported to be doing that. He built the whole thing in his head and then imagined running it in his head for days. And he was able to troubleshoot a lot of the things that could have gone wrong without actually building many prototypes and everything that blew up.
People can't do that.
Yeah, but that's a kind of an extreme
situation. Storyboarding too, like we talk about. We tell our designers, for instance, and narrative designers, and work with the artists to storyboard stuff, right? You have to. And the game designers doing game systems, we usually do paper prototypes. Thinking about it is one thing. Getting it in a concrete form you can share with others, and of course see it in operation, at least theoretically, is another stage. And those are kind of mandatory parts of to make creativity sort of more, I don't know, transmissible or transferable. Because I think that's the challenge. Everybody's creative, but for creativity to be lasting or to have an impact, it usually has to have a context. Our contexts at Champlain tend to be fairly strict sometimes, but that doesn't mean they can't be creative, but it does mean that it's not a free-for-all with no discipline. And I think discipline and creativity go hand in hand. You need both.
Yeah.
I mean, and to mathematically be truly creative, I don't know if you can have true creativity, in my view, without a certain degree of discipline. But that's just my own personal.
And I agree, because so the idea of creativity, the ideal process, especially if there is a problem solving or something that has to be applied at the end, is like the circle. You start, you produce ideas, you evaluate them, you go back to other ideas, you reconnect the same elements, you evaluate them, and then you start. So there is this free form part in different ways with the widening or connecting and organizing at different steps. But there's always that evaluation part that otherwise you will not get nowhere. Otherwise you will be coloring books.
But even that process is a form of mental discipline.
Yeah, that's exactly my
yeah,
point.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's a difference between a child who's a creative child that's undirected, and it's a good promising start, but you want to get the child to the point where they can act on that creativity and use it to their own benefit. Right? You need the creativity, the impulse first.
Yeah, but even with a child, I have a 3 years old and extremely creative, but he already learned with some um, creative constructive iteration that as much as will be amazing and creative to put painting on the walls, we don't do that because that would not be the
You're
best.
not constantly Guernica, so stop it.
Yeah, maybe in 20 years when you have your own place, you do whatever you want. But so yeah, even with children, you do the same thing, and that's also why creativity is based in knowledge at this level, because knowledge is what helps putting that discipline elements back into the equation. So that's the other I think good thing to consider. And I think I also want to give, if there's a, see if anyone have questions, see if all the points I wanted to touch diverse perspective. One thing assignment. Yeah, I think the point is, I think I touch in a not so organized way, but the more like free form way, the points that I think are the most important. And the I think one of the main thing is what Bob just says, that creativity is not omnipresent, even if we have creativity as extremely high in our class or rubric. That doesn't mean that every single moment in the class on the assignment has to be related to be creative and create something new, but actually can encompass all these different steps, and also can take into consideration the facts that individual students may be more or less comfortable with creativity, and as long as they feel safe, they could work in a group when they have different roles. And and then I think the other interesting aspect is that there's different tricks or different aspects that can help implementing or encouraging creativity in different assignment, like the visual thinking that can be implemented, having this low-stake assignment that can help.
So it's interesting, and I've been having an exchange with Amanda
Mhm.
Recently about this particular competency. And as an artist, as someone who works in the sort of creative arts, one of the things she really wants to talk about is helping her students develop their own creative process. And she didn't really see how the rubric that we have now was sort of process oriented, which was very confusing to me, because brainstorming, iteration, feedback, all parts of a process.
Yes.
That I know from friends, sort of grounded in the artistic approach to creativity. But what are some of the ways? So we talked about ways in which you can sort of foster creativity. Are there any ways in which we can even go a step further and have students be much more conscious of their creative process and be able to recognize, okay, yeah, I think best in the shower, or I need these certain conditions for me to be really functioning at a creative level, in addition to going through these steps?
Yeah, there are different ways that work, and also a lot always depends on the time and the constraints that you have. One easy thing is asking people or students to keep like a journal or a creativity diary every day, and list down. It doesn't have to be just bullet points are enough, or even visual stickers they can use depending on what they're doing, and just say, okay, for 1 week, every day, every time I have a creative idea, it even doesn't have to be related to school. I may have a creative idea because there is a roadblock and I found a good way of going around it. Anything that is creative in my day, I write it down. At the end of the week, in small groups, students go over their ideas, and then they find whatever is the common parts.
Mhm.
And also, I would suggest that not only they write the creative ideas, what they do, but how they felt. Because you may have a great creative performance and hate it. And so that's probably not the best thing for you. You might, because emotion is very linked to creativity. So not just only you have to be safe in the environment, knowing that your idea will not be criticized or mocked, but you also have to feel good while you do that. So having a diary when you list your creative journey for that week and how you're feeling helps then having a feedback moment when you can evaluate your own creativity. That's one way that I've seen working pretty well, and then also students seems, and even adult like professionals seems to like. And then the other way that is more doesn't require that like longitudinal approach. There are a standardized way of testing creativity in a more abstract way, so that is not related to a specific profession. So it goes is not linked to a specific competency or expertise that you have. So I can test a game studios student, psychology students. Uh, a creative writing major or a business student using the same task. And that will tell if a person, for example, is better at generating a lot of ideas, is better at reorganizing, is better at changing the train of thoughts. And it's not as precise as the diary, because the diary is really rooted in individual experiences, but still gives a starting point in telling this is what you're really good at. And then talking about the experience can say like, oh, I was really good at generating all this idea, but what I would really like to excel is actually be able to switch perspective or reconnecting this idea in different ways. And so you can say, oh, you do that, you can do, and the test come with suggestion of doing that thing. So that could be, I those things I don't think can be integrated in a rubric. It's a little complicated, but could be activities that can be suggested. And if there is interest, I'm also happy to prepare like hands out or those things that people can use and adapt.
It would be very, is part of it to see, well, I have strength in this particular aspect of creativity,
Yeah.
and maybe I should look to develop the other ones.
Yeah, and that could be, or I have a strength, so when I work in group project, this is where I'm starting from, and I can really bring a lot. And this is interesting. Like for best creative performance, it's better to build groups when there are different strengths. So having this information, I can get people that excel or enjoy different aspects of creativity and have them work together. That I will have more creative outcomes, happier students, and also more productive. But yeah, you can either bank on your strengths or give feedback so that you can improve other strengths. And for example, I think for artists, having the possibility of building self-confidence on their own strengths, but also knowing that they can add and increase other strengths, it could be very, very useful.
Yeah, I'd love to see links to that sort of
Yeah.
that research, and
Absolutely.
even a real basic test that some instructors could attempt to
Yeah,
use or find a way to
Yeah,
incorporate
I
in
have
class.
most of them. So
Yeah,
happy
that
to
would be
share.
very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound good. We
Mhm.
talk a lot about creative friction
Mhm.
because sometimes the students have, not just students, a lot of people have the idea that the ideal group situation is one in which everybody agrees and everything, and that's really not particularly productive.
Yeah.
You don't want a dysfunction hating each other, but you want that friction of different ideas and different viewpoints and different approaches. That's where the creativity, in my experience, really comes from, especially for student groups, when they are forced to confront equally valid approaches to things from different perspectives and then come up with something that's entirely different and not one of those, but it's kind of a synthesis of all of those, which gives you several competencies. But but that creative friction really just getting them to understand the positive nature of disagreement or difference is I think is essential to the type of creativity we want, but it also does bear with a lot of the other competencies.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm, of course, seeing the overlap here.
Yeah.
I've always thought there was a strong connection between creativity and integration, creative thinking and integrative thinking. And that's, but I sort of integrative thinking really primarily focus on connection making, right? which is why I went to that to begin
Yeah.
with. But the overlap with one thing I hadn't thought about, and again, this is because you so often get stuck in the mindset of thinking of creativity as being sort of individual geniuses, right? But in the context of groups, obviously,
Collaboration is one thing.
collaboration, there's a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of overlap with collaboration.
Diversity and inclusion also helps.
Yes.
There's a lot of it. Actually, if you work on strongly on diversity and inclusion, you will have a more creative class.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what we try to tell also in the professional settings, with multiple majors here,
Mhm.
that even if you are not personally enthused with some of the language and goals of DEI, from a professional perspective, you damn well better be interested in it because your products are going to be one hell of a lot better. You'll be successful more likely than not if you embrace it. So take your
100%.
pick.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Right?
Well, any questions from out there? Tracy or Rebecca or Caroline, anything you would like to ask before we wrap up?
I don't have any questions. I just want to say thank you. That was really interesting. I appreciate it. That
Thank
perspective.
you.
Yeah, same. I also don't have any questions, but that was great. I really appreciated being able to hear your perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, really useful, really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's give me some good ideas for class and stuff.
And-
Excellent.
And I'm available, like even if there's anything, I'm happy.
Absolutely. We'll do more of that next semester, I think.
Great.
People are a little less crazy.
But all of these things I've been to
Yeah.
are very good in sort of, as you say, bringing these competencies to life,
Yeah.
taking them out of the realm of some sort of stodgy thing in the website and making them part of the living practice. And I think the grant seems to be working in that regard.
Yeah. So Barb, thank you so
Thank you.
much. Really appreciate it. I'm thinking of creativity in groups. It's really helpful thinking of it in terms of the reorganization. In addition to connection making was really helpful for me too. So
Okay,
thank you so
thanks.
much.
I'm happy that was helpful.